Okay, part 4 of War Castles, and he's just saying about the founding fathers didn't want to get involved with people they didn't know, like the King of France or Spain, and so they preferred to sign a treaty with the British realm, and that was George III.
Decided to go ahead and joined her with Great Britain, and they put the post office in Washington, D.C., Great Britain's post office in Washington, D.C., which is a foreign enclave of the United States. It never has been part of the United States. And it was opened up as the District of Columbia as a foreign enclave because it was the post office for Great Britain. So what that means is that the King of Great Britain placing his post office here opened up commerce to the rest of the world because he was the reigning monarch. So if the rest of the monarchs or dictators wanted to come into this...
So England right in the middle, Great Britain right in the middle of Columbia, of America.
...country and rape and pillage it for its goods, they would have to go through him and his post office. So everything that was shipped in and out of this country, all commerce, he got a piece of through that post office. So that was the first bankruptcy, was Benjamin Franklin borrowed 1.6 million francs from the French. The second bankruptcy started when Abraham Lincoln borrowed the money from the IMF and the World Bank. Now, before I get into that, I want to say this. So the Founding Fathers had a pact, and that was that an accord, a gentleman's agreement between themselves, and that was that they were to never borrow any money from the IMF and the World Bank. And that is because the IMF and the World Banks owe no allegiance to any one particular monarch. And so they decided, the agreement was that they would only borrow money from other monarchs because the monarchs were only as powerful as their armies.
Not that those banking systems were available then, as far as I know, but the fact that actually they wouldn't borrow from people such as that.
And
I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
If they stayed in contract with two monarchs at the same time, if one monarch ever decided to try and invade the colonies, they would have to concur with the other monarch first before they could invade, so they didn't mess up something that other monarch had going on. So it gave the colonies time to react and get a plan in place to go ahead and move forward and try to figure out how to get themselves out of whatever debacle they might have found themselves in. So at a later time, as we went through the historical records and we ran into, of course, the Civil War was next, we found out that Abraham Lincoln, after the colonies dissolved and they broke in half, there was no more United States. It had ended, the North against the South. So you have two separate countries fighting against each other, essentially is what happened here during the Civil War, because the South did raise its own flag and did substantiate itself as its own nation state. Abraham Lincoln, we found, violated the pact. He was the president that went ahead and borrowed money from the IMF and the World Bank, thereby violating the gentleman's agreement or the accord that the Founding Fathers had to never do that. And when he did, he initiated the beginning of the second international bankruptcy. That led us down into, of course, 1933 to the beginning of the third and final international bankruptcy, and also the Great Depression, the stock market crash of 1929. And from there, this is all laid out historically with what happened in relation to this syntax key that had been placed on these mortgages. And this is how far back we had to track to find out what in the world gave this syntax key power to be utilized on these mortgage contracts to conduct the syntax in the manner that it had been conducted, to validate the fact that they were all grammatical fraud, banking fraud, grammar fraud, you name it, fraud.
It seems to me that the Constitution, which of course has been messed around with a great deal over the period of time, should also be written in this syntax language.
Once we had backtracked that key and found out how it was given the authority to be placed on that contract to conduct the syntacking that it had conducted, we ran across the largest national security secret ever covered up in the history of the United States. So this led us right back into the birth certificate and how the birth certificate system even got started here.
Not just the United States, but as he said earlier, the whole world.
America.
People are used as collateral with other nations because the U.S. is bankrupt. The United States declared bankruptcy on March 9th of 1933. At this point, the U.S. began taking out loans from a private, non-government affiliated corporation called the Federal Reserve. With no money to pay back the loans, the United States began using the citizens as collateral.
And that, of course, is what happens in England as well.
And that started back in 1933 with the beginning of the third and final international bankruptcy. And, of course, we had found out at that point that the United States owed so much to the IMF and the World Bank for what Lincoln had done that Roosevelt had to give up all of the gold that was here in the United States to pay off the debt to the IMF and the World Bank. So the United States was completely broke. We had no money. And so they devised the birth certificate system, in which case the people themselves were the gold bars, became the gold bars. And
it's known as the straw man. Okay? It's known as, and there's a lot of information on i-uv.com. That's i-uv.com.
And they had been built for taxes to pay off whatever debt was still remained, whatever debt still remained, or whatever debt was still going to be incurred by the financial needs of the United States. And that system came to an end on November 2nd, 1999. That entire system came to an end. And with that, like I said, we uncovered the largest national security secret ever kept in the history of the United States. We still don't know why it's been kept a secret. We have a good idea of why it's been kept a secret, because we understand now that the deep state's in charge. We understand who the deep state is, we know how they operate, and this has been one of the largest deep state secrets in the history of the United States. And we're bringing it forward because we understand what the hell happened. So you think to yourself, okay, well, it's a birth certificate system, so what? So they use the people as chattel to create an income off of, so they could substantiate the wealth that was necessary to go ahead and get us through our administrative ordeals as a nation. As we got looking at this thing, and we researched it further and deeper into what the birth certificate system was, this thing was attached to the largest warfare platform in the world that was essentially created to go ahead and capture everybody on the planet as chattel or property.
Exactly.
And
it was King John that gave all the people of the British Isles and their lands to the Vatican. So that all ties in.
This was how they were going to go ahead and create their wealth off the sweat of everybody else's backs. And so this led us, of course...
Just to give you a date to that, that was, I believe it was 1213. Magna Carta was 1212, and I think King John, I think it was then.
Of course, right back to the Vatican, London City, and the Pentagon. And those were the three locations on planet Earth, the three war castles, so to speak, that substantiated the empire of the three city-states. And I encourage all you guys out there to take a look at the empire of the three city-states and do your research on the empire of the three city-states and exactly what that is. The Vatican is...
Why I'm quite filled in with this, because many years ago I did research into the banking. Started with the Bank of England, and wow, that took me to the right down the bottom of the Vatican to 2,000 years ago.
So when we looked at the Vatican, this place was just the esotericism there, the esoteric symbolism behind this entire warfare platform was all over it. I mean, this thing just reeked of esoteric knowledge. It was just, the symbols were everywhere. Now, when you look down at the Vatican, you see a keyhole and a phallus, and of course the timelines and the shipping lanes coming off there, and the keyholes that lead to those, the doorways that lead from those timelines and shipping lanes from the phallus, from the center of the keyhole there.
Okay, we'll be starting on part 5 in the next few minutes. Bye-bye. Katanya Alvin saying God bless and stay tuned.